The United States is often described as a consumer economy, but that label misses the real mechanism underneath. What actually powers this system is debt. Not reckless debt, not personal failure. Structured debt. Engineered debt. Debt designed to move money upward, while risk moves downward. This is not a moral story. It is a mechanical one. Every modern economy needs circulation. Money has to keep moving, or growth slows. In the US, wages alone are no longer sufficient to keep that circulation at the level the system expects. So another input is required. That input is borrowing. When income stops scaling with productivity, debt steps in to fill the gap. This shift did not happen overnight. Decades ago, household spending tracked fairly closely with earnings. Today, spending tracks lifestyle expectations, while earnings lag behind. The difference between the two is bridged by structured financial products that convert future income into present spending power. From the outside, it looks like access. From the inside, it functions as obligation. Debt in the US is not primarily about emergencies. It is about normalization. Housing, education, transportation, healthcare, and even basic consumption are increasingly priced on the assumption that the buyer will borrow. The system is calibrated around monthly payments, not total cost. That design choice matters more than most people realize. Monthly payment thinking changes behavior. When prices are framed as installments, resistance drops. A number that feels unaffordable as a lump sum becomes acceptable when sliced into smaller units. This psychological shift is not accidental. It is built into how products are marketed, sold, and financed. Once borrowing becomes normal, it becomes invisible. People stop asking whether something is expensive and start asking whether the payment fits. That single change transfers pricing power away from households and toward institutions. The higher the tolerance for debt, the higher prices can rise without triggering pushback. Now consider who benefits from this structure. Lenders earn interest, but that is only part of the picture. Financial institutions also benefit from predictability. Debt creates scheduled cash flows. Scheduled cash flows can be bundled, sold, insured, and leveraged. They become assets in their own right, independent of the borrower's experience. Servicers benefit from scale. The more accounts exist, the more fees are generated through maintenance, processing, penalties, and adjustments. Even when balances decline, the system continues to extract value through administration. Large corporations benefit indirectly. When consumers can borrow, companies can raise prices without immediately losing demand. Debt smooths price shocks. It allows costs to increase faster than wages without collapsing consumption. Governments benefit as well. Debt-fueled spending supports tax revenue without requiring politically difficult wage reforms. It delays pressure. It buys time. That time, however, is not free. Now look at the other side. Who pays the price? Households pay first, but not always in obvious ways. The cost is not only interest, it is fragility. Debt reduces margin for error. A system built on monthly obligations becomes sensitive to disruption. Job loss, illness, or regional downturns hit harder when fixed payments cannot pause. Time is another cost. Debt extends the working life of income. Future labor is already spoken for. That limits flexibility, mobility, and risk-taking. Choices narrow, not because of lack of ambition, but because the cost of miscalculation becomes too high. Stress is an unpriced externality. Constant obligation changes how people think, plan, and relate to money. Short-term survival crowds out long-term strategy. Financial decisions become reactive instead of intentional. Communities pay a price too. High debt loads suppress local investment. Money flows outward to servicing centers instead of circulating locally. Neighborhoods become consumers of capital rather than builders of it. The labor market is affected as well. Workers with high fixed obligations are less able to negotiate, retrain, or walk away from poor conditions. Debt increases compliance. It stabilizes the workforce, but not necessarily in a healthy way. What makes this system durable is that it does not feel coercive. Participation is framed as opportunity. Borrowing is presented as progress. And in many cases, it genuinely enables access that would otherwise be impossible. That truth makes the system harder to question. But access and advantage are not the same thing. The U.S. debt economy is efficient at producing growth metrics, corporate earnings, and asset appreciation. It is less efficient at producing resilience for the average household. The gains are concentrated. The risks are distributed. This is not about blaming individuals for borrowing. The system is built so that opting out often means exclusion. Understanding it requires stepping back and seeing the architecture, not just the outcomes. Debt is not the villain of this story. Dependency is. When an economy requires constant borrowing to function at its expected level, the burden does not disappear. It is simply deferred, shifted, and quietly compounded. And that raises the question that matters most. If this structure continues as designed, who remains protected when the margin for error finally runs out? The most misunderstood feature of the U.S. debt economy is not how much people borrow, but how prices are set assuming that borrowing will happen. This is where the system quietly locks itself in. Once pricing logic is built around finance consumption, affordability stops being the reference point. Payment tolerance replaces it. This change reshaped entire industries. Housing prices no longer reflect median earnings in a region. They reflect what households can stretch to monthly, given prevailing financing structures. Education costs followed the same path. Tuition did not rise because learning suddenly became more valuable. It rose because payment systems allowed costs to detach from near-term income. Transportation followed. Healthcare followed. Even basic retail followed. When the question becomes, can you manage this payment? Instead of, is this worth this price? The ceiling lifts. Providers are no longer constrained by wages. They are constrained only by how much obligation households can absorb before default rates spike. That gap between price and income is the hidden engine of the debt economy. It creates the illusion of progress while quietly eroding stability. People appear to advance, but the ground underneath becomes thinner. Access is the word that makes this palatable. Access to housing, access to education, access to mobility. Access sounds inclusive. It sounds empowering. But access without proportional income growth comes at a cost. That cost is future control. When future income is committed in advance, choice narrows. Not immediately. Gradually. The first year feels manageable. The second feels normal. By the fifth, the structure feels permanent. That permanence is what the system relies on. Risk does not disappear in this arrangement. It is simply repositioned. Institutions reduce exposure through scale, insurance, and diversification. Households absorb concentration risk. One income, one location, one health event, one economic shock. This asymmetry matters. When something goes wrong at scale, institutions negotiate, restructure, or receive support. When something goes wrong at the household level, the consequences are personal, immediate, and often irreversible. The system depends on the idea that disruptions are rare and isolated, but modern economic shocks are increasingly systemic. Regional job losses, healthcare cost spikes, and housing volatility affect large populations at once. When too many households hit the same wall simultaneously, the design is stress-tested. Another quiet cost is innovation loss at the personal level. High fixed obligations discourage experimentation. Starting a small business, switching careers, relocating, or taking time to reskill all require slack. Debt removes slack. The economy gains short-term consumption but loses long-term adaptability. This trade-off rarely enters public conversation because consumption is visible and adaptability is not. Quarterly numbers look strong. Household balance sheets look strained. Both can be true at the same time. The debt economy also reshapes how success is measured. Net worth becomes less about ownership and more about access. Use replaces control. People appear asset-rich but are obligation-heavy. That distinction changes how power flows. Ownership allows exit. Obligation enforces continuity. Another effect is cultural. When obligation becomes normal, overextension becomes invisible. Comparison replaces calibration. If everyone around you is stretched, stretching feels responsible. The system does not need persuasion. It relies on social proof. This environment rewards compliance over optimization. Households learn to manage within constraints rather than question them. Financial literacy, when offered, often focuses on coping tactics instead of structural understanding. Budgeting becomes a survival tool rather than a strategy for leverage. The U.S. debt economy is not collapsing, but it is maturing. Mature systems become more sensitive to shocks because margins are thinner. Growth requires increasing input for diminishing output. Each new dollar of borrowing generates less real improvement in living standards than before. This is why frustration rises even when aggregate indicators look stable. People feel stuck because they are. Not individually. Systemically. Who benefits as this continues? Institutions that can price risk, offload exposure, and extract fees regardless of outcomes. Corporations that sell necessity rather than discretion. Governments that prefer deferred pressure to immediate reform. Who pays? Households that trade resilience for continuity. Communities that lose local capital circulation. Workers whose bargaining power erodes under fixed obligations. None of this requires bad actors. It requires incentives. Systems follow incentives, not intentions. Understanding this does not require rejection of borrowing entirely. It requires clarity. The danger is not debt itself. It is building a life that only works if nothing goes wrong. A resilient household is not one with perfect timing or high income. It is one with margin. Margin absorbs shock. Margin restores choice. Margin is what the current system quietly extracts. The U.S. debt economy thrives by monetizing the absence of margin. Every dollar committed in advance is a dollar removed from future flexibility. Multiply that across millions of households, and the macro picture emerges. The question is not whether this system will end. Systems like this do not end abruptly. They recalibrate. The cost of recalibration depends on where risk sits when it happens. Right now, much of that risk is parked at the household level. That is efficient for institutions. It is expensive for people. Recognizing this is not pessimism. It is orientation. Once the structure is visible, decisions change. Not dramatically. Incrementally. And incremental change is how margin is rebuilt. The most valuable shift is not tactical. It is conceptual. Moving from asking, "What can I afford per month?" to "What does this commit my future to?" That single reframing restores agency. The debt economy is powerful because it feels normal. Its greatest vulnerability is that it depends on continued silence about trade-offs. When people understand who benefits and who pays, the system does not disappear. But participation becomes intentional rather than automatic. And intention is the first form of protection available inside any system that is not designed for your margin, but profits from its absence.